This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
You've joined us for an episode on the Templars and Freemasonry, as the Knights Templar and Freemasonry are two organizations that have been shrouded in mystery and speculation for centuries. We have talked about both of these issues before, but we've actually never really had a Templar on the podcast. So I want to welcome our guest this week, Right Worshipful Kurt Morauer, Senior, to the Craftsman Online podcast. Welcome, my brother.
Michael, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I thoroughly have enjoyed listening to these podcasts, and thank you. I'm honored.
Kurt is one of our early subscribers to the Craftsman Online podcast subscription that we have on Patreon. I would say you're probably one of the most active Patreon members that we have. He constantly is posting great comments about the episodes, and really a good sounding board for me, so I know like what's working, what we could be changing, or things that we could be talking about. And you and I stumbled onto this one, and as I mentioned, like we've never really had a Templar on the podcast, so I want to get started from a real high level here. What inspired you to become a Masonic Knight Templar?
I became a Mason because I wanted to be a Shriner. So I'm one of those weird guys. At the time, you had to be either a York Rite Mason or a Scottish Rite Mason before you could become a Shriner. And I had two brothers in my lodge that were competing on membership numbers. And so they told me that I had to be both a York Rite Mason and a Scottish Rite Mason if I wanted to be a Shriner. So I signed up for both. After getting involved with York Rite, I just became fascinated with the whole Knights Templar version of the Templars. I love that type of history, and they had a far more significant impact on how our world looks today, especially in Europe and the Middle East, than people realize.
You're the second brother I've talked to that got into Freemasonry because they were drawn to want to be a Shriner, and then found out, oh, no, you have to be a Freemason to be a Shriner. And well, at basic principles of, like-minded and wanting to be charitable and believing in relief and giving and coming to the aid of folks, those exist in both things. Freemasonry is much different than if you went to join the Lions or the Rotary Club to get involved with like a benevolent organization, to use those as an example. What were your thoughts when you joined the craft that had all of these esoteric and deeper meanings with all this history sprinkled throughout it?
It really was confusing trying to adjust Bible stories and readings, because I was active in reading the Bible, to what I saw in Masonry. There was just a conflict there for me for quite a long period of time. Actually, getting beyond that conflict was one of the reasons that I really got into esoteric studies, to let's find out, what are they really talking about? So many of us take our degree work at face value, i.e. what they're saying really did happen in the Bible. But by doing the research, you come to the point of understanding what esoteric really means in Freemasonry. Coach Nagy may have said it once, but it was, we're a secret society, not from the public, but from each other. We've got to change that going into some of the blog discussions that you've been involved in. If we don't get more esoteric, more spiritual in Masonry, we're gonna have a bad time.
I want to get to the origins of the Templar. We've talked, like I've mentioned before on previous podcast episodes, the Templars that were part of the Crusades. There's a difference in history between those Templars that fell at the village of Acre during that battle, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for those Templars, to the Masonic Templars that came afterwards. How do you tell the beginning of the Masonic Templars with kind of the fall of the Knights Templars from the Crusades that we know from history.
Acre was the last big battle, if you will, for the Templars. Once they lost Acre and eventually from Cyprus made their way back into Europe. And then, of course, we all know that the French king owed them money, and so he didn't want to pay it, and so he killed them all. I mean, that's a simplified version, but that's what happened. And the Templars themselves scattered throughout the world. Although the Pope, and he was forced by the French king to do this, he didn't want to do it, is declared them heretic. The Templars found refuge in every other Catholic country, with the exception of France. And Portugal accepted them openly. As a matter of fact, the last structural medieval Templars organization was in Portugal. And it ended basically in the early 1900s, is my understanding, but it did exist there. The Templars were very popular in England and in Scotland with the royal families because of their military prowess, and were often the military advisors to the kings on how to do battle, how to build battlements, things of that nature. So they had a very good standing, a high standing, if you will, with the English-related islands. Good deal of them ended up in Scotland because the Scottish people were just the friendliest to them, and it was the farthest away they could get from France and from the Pope, who resided in France. The Templars were some of the earliest travelers to the Americas, and were just discovering how early it was. It predates Columbus tremendously. And they had, at the time of their demise, the biggest standing navy in the world. They were the largest corporation, if you will. They had the banking system. They had the largest fort structure, and nobody was going to bother them. The one thing that the Templars were big at, that we all know about, is building these incredible churches and fortifications, throughout the known world, especially in what they call Outremer, which is now we know as the Middle East. If you think about it, and again, this is the historical aspect of studying these things, they had to build a fort just about one day's walking from one fort to another, because that's what ended up, from a protection standpoint, that's what you had to do. So there was a stream of forts all throughout the world that the Templars controlled. And that's actually what made their idea of what we call banking so feasible, because I could go from Templar outpost to outpost and never have to have any money. And so I was much less attractive to bandits.
Yeah, when you talk about like protection, that's the one thing in all senses of the word that the Templars could offer. And here's the other thing. I'm just so excited in my mind because I'm like, wow, I bet you like Brother Kurt and I, we'd have a great conversation about Oak Island, the Runestone, like all the stories about the Templars that exist out there. I'm sure you're very well versed in them as well. How much of that do you separate from fact to lore, or have you heard anything that just surprised you and you're like, that has to be true?
The one thing that I know it's true, because I've been there, is in Newport, Rhode Island. They have a tower on the highest point of ground in the town. And if you talk to the city elders in Newport, they profess that it's an ancient windmill. They've already proven from a scientific standpoint, but the structure that was built, which was all of stone, could never support the energy that a windmill would put out as far as the torque on the building and whatever. So it wasn't a windmill. They've discovered the footprint of the wooden aspect of what it was, which would have been a typical Templar structure as far as having a wooden house, if you will, attached to a stone fortification. Also within the fortification, the way that the windows were set up is certain astrological things happen at a certain time. And astrology, which is a fascinating part of Masonry, which I am not into yet, this building was structured to accept the different solstices. And it was built in a Templar stone fashion. Well, in the colonies at that time, there was no stone construction of any type. Everything was made of wood, primarily because they had to put things up quickly because of Indian attack. They didn't have time to build fortifications. The Templars were such a strong military force that they didn't have to worry about the Indian attack while they were doing their thing. So it definitely is a Templar facility that was built in the New World at an early time. Now, the Oak Island stuff, when they finally find something for real, which they should have by this point in time, then I'll say, hey, man, that really is cool.
I want to go back to the point you were talking about with the lighthouse. I believe you and I have seen the same presentation. And the brother that gave it was Scott Walter. I believe he did a show called American History Uncovered or Undiscovered or Unmasked, perhaps. I can't remember. But I'll never forget his presentation where he talked about his research into the runestone, particularly about, being at the University of Minnesota and getting the phone call and being able to examine this stone that was unearthed from a farmer's field, and the wild journey that led him on to find out what these carvings, and I think it was the hooked X, this stone led him to visit Denmark and really get into some of the studies of the Nordic travelers that were coming from those areas. Just the clenchings of rear ends on the hardwood bench seats that we were all sitting in when he proposed the idea that perhaps Jesus was married and that he had gone into Israel and had seen where supposedly the family was buried and that Jesus had children and things. It was so interesting because this was a presentation that was actually sponsored by the commandery in our district. And I was blown away that there was this Christian group that was having this guy give this discussion. And it was a program at a lodge meeting. And like all the things we weren't supposed to talk about, he was talking about, but not in a way that was comparative, like one religion is better than the other, but just in more of a sharing of the history of it, the true story of the events that took place. And that was so meaningful. It really inspired me to actually want to join my first concordant body, which was the York Rite. And I did go through the degrees in chapter and had an interest in getting into commandery. And this is kind of the question I know I'm kind of building to. You alluded to it. But I had asked several times, like, okay, so next I'll have to do the council degrees. Okay, and is this ever going to come to a point where I have to go to the altar and put my hands on the great light and say, I will defend one religion over another? No, you'd never have to do that. And then I was told by other brothers that, yes, that would happen in commandery. So is that the case? And you've kind of outlined that you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to be a Masonic Templar, but does that make the experience different if you're not?
Oh, I believe that it would make the experience different if you're not, because you do take an obligation to defend the Christian faith. Now, that doesn't say that you have to be a Christian to defend the Christian faith. Even during the medieval times, the Crusaders would contract with the Muslims for both trade purposes, but also for battle purposes. Because if you think about it, the Muslim world at that time was all made up of tribes as well. That were constantly fighting, and it only took a exceptional leader like Saladin to bring the tribes together for a common cause. But other than that, they were always fighting each other. So there's actually proof that the Templars would contract out to different Muslim groups, okay, to defend them against other Muslim groups, especially if it was involved in the trade process or had anything to do with Christians that were trying to get to Jerusalem. There was a lot of crossover. I mean, even to the point that, because I know that you're going to ask, the Templars and their Muslim partners, if you will, had to have a way to identify whether they were friends or foes. They did that in those times through secret handshakes and secret words. That whole concept of that type of activity, which of course for us is big in Masonry, but that whole concept of secret societies really came out of, okay, I want to make sure you're not going to stab me. Okay, so here's the passcode. That may be, if there's anything that the Templars gave to us actively, that could be part of what they might have given us, because they brought a lot of those practices to Scotland. And most of the forms of Freemasonry from my reading, that we have actually came through Scotland originally.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Are you ready to show your Masonic flair once the warm weather finally gets here and stays here? Well, here's a must-have, the Masonic Working Tools t-shirt. It fits like a well-loved favorite. It's super soft with cotton, excellent quality print. It really makes it one to fall in love with over and over again. And by the way, the design on the front basically gives away what the t-shirt's all about, but of course it's that esoteric layout that, to no one, now you know what's going on. Get your Masonic Working Tools t-shirt in a ton of colors, from plain white tee to blue, black, gray, red. Hey, this shirt is going to state your love for the craft in a super casual and comfy fashion. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Brothers, do you remember how you felt when you were first called to Freemasonry? The excitement of each degree? If you can still feel that call of the East, you're encouraged to apply to join the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The Scottish Rite offers Master Masons like you an opportunity to continue your Masonic journey and delve deeper into our craft through their 29 degrees. And there's an easy way to join the Scottish Rite. It's called Join the Rite Knight, a virtual initiation where you can witness the requisite 4th degree and officially become a Scottish Rite Mason. There's 7 opportunities to join online from February 1st to April 25th. Here's what you do. Visit the Scottish Rite online at srnmj.us and click on the Join button. You can also join in person at a Scottish Rite reunion near you. Your journey to the 32nd degree in Freemasonry awaits. Take the first step at srnmj.us and click on the Join button today. Let's get back to the part where you said the obligation and the duty of a Templar. So it's pretty clear to us through the Blue Lodge degrees what is expected of us as being a Freemason. Basically, be a good citizen, be there for relief, be there for brothers and their widows and orphans, without giving away any of the obligations or any of the penalties. What's also expected to you as you get up to that Templar level?
Really little difference as far as the fundamental truths. And that's a key thing to always have in mind, is that there's all these truths that go back thousands of years that apply to almost every core religion, almost every core philosophical society. And they're just fundamental things that you have to believe in them to get through life, if you will. But so the Templars we take the same obligations that we have at a Blue Lodge altar, with the exception that there is specifically defense of the Christian religion. There is a much higher spiritual outcome in everything that we talk about in our obligations. It's the only place in Freemasonry where we actively talk about Jesus, where we say the Lord's Prayer as part of our regular process. Really just support Christian fundamentals in our day-to-day activity. You know from going through the other York Rite bodies that there really is a focus on the Old Testament there. To be part of the commandery is where you focus on the New Testament aspect of what goes on. That's the fundamental difference.
Yeah, it's so interesting you brought that point up, because I've had a more fine-tuned ear when it comes to a lot of the religious and the scripture tones that come in, and the passages that we read, and the prayers, and why things are selected. And if you had a scorecard up, you'd go, wow, the 3 degrees in Blue Lodge Masonry really lean heavy into the Old Testament, when it seemed then that man was still trying to figure out who this God was, who this deity was, and how to have this relationship with with God. And then you get to the New Testament and you're like, hey, we know who this guy is now because he sent this, son of his who's walking and talking amongst us. And he seems to be a friendlier God at that point. So it's interesting to be able to have a branch of Freemasonry that discusses that relationship with God, because we're still trying, at least in the foundational degrees, to build our temple and make that connection with God. And by the time you get to this point, all of that work has been completed. And this is why these are extra degrees that you will take in Freemasonry, because you yourself mentally have also matured to a certain point.
Hopefully. Really, one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we don't teach people the fundamentals to build a strong foundation. And again, I go back to the Americanization of Freemasonry. Still in Europe, in many places, they do a degree a year, period. We do 3 degrees in a weekend sometimes. So it's, when I sat through the Scottish Rite, I did all 32, well, take away the first 3, but in one weekend. How do you learn anything from that? And matter of fact, I was visiting lodges in England and Scotland a number of years ago. They wanted to give me high grand honors because as a district deputy grand master in this country, it was a big deal over there, much bigger than we make it here. And so they wanted to give me English high grand honors. And after finding out what they go through for their degrees to get to a certain point, I was going, I don't think so. I mean, let me come back in a couple of years. And I mean, over there, if you're a 32nd degree Mason, chances are that you've been a Mason for 35 years to get just to that point. And that's not true everywhere, but it is true in a lot of places. They take it much more seriously than we do, especially regarding fundamentals. When you're an apprentice, afterwards you're going, what in the hell happened to me? You don't remember a thing. And really, unless you watch other people go through an EA degree, you never really get a handle on what it is that you went through. I've been a Mason now for 22 years, and I still, in 22 years, I've been involved in every degree in my lodge except probably 4 or 5. Every time I am in a degree, and especially true in York Rite, because we don't do that work that much, is I always find something new. In other words, there's always a piece of new light that comes from watching, and only because I know that I'm ready at that point to see it. Was it there 22 years ago? Yeah, it was there 22 years ago.
I used to meet at the Albany Masonic Temple with the lodge that I was a member of. And that was really the only exposure that I had with the Knights Templar. We had a commandery there is a commandery in the Albany Masonic Temple. And 2 of the members, the brothers of my lodge, were in commandery. And we got to go into, for lack of a better term, their storage room where they kept all the uniforms they would wear for the parades and the regalia. I was like, wow, this is so cool. And of course, like, a 12-year-old boy, I picked up one of the swords and they're like, put that down. I'm like, oh, and here's your chapeaus that you guys wear. And this is also awesome. And that was really, if you want to talk about the deepest that I got into commandery, it was at that moment. Not a great story. I'm sure you have a better one. What is something that you want our listener to take away knowing now about the Knights Templar and Freemasonry?
You can get involved with it because it is the Christian aspect of Freemasonry. I enjoy the work that we do. I mean, we do a lot of marching around in really cool costumes, and that's what's supposed to happen. It's a fantastic way to build brotherhood, because if you have a room full of guys and they're supposed to be marching in formation in lockstep and doing left turn right and all this kind of stuff, if you will. But it's all very militaristic from one standpoint, but it's a fun militaristic, from another standpoint. So it's just being involved in commandery to learn the floor work is cool, because everybody participates. You don't have to be in a chair to participate like in Blue Lodge.
So as I was getting ready to research for this episode, Google search, and I stumbled upon the Gainesville Sun news article, which we'll get a link to that in the notes for this episode so our listener can check it out. And it featured your remarks at the Masonic Memorial Appreciation Day at the historic Evergreen Cemetery in Southeast Gainesville. And I was really moved by a lot of the comments that you had made. Kurt, what has been the most rewarding part of your experience in the York Rite or as a member of the Commandery in Freemasonry?
Wow. The most rewarding experience that I've had in York Rite has been being part of Commandery. I also believe that Commandery, closely behind Shrine, is one of our most visible bodies as far as getting the truth about Freemasonry, which and by that I mean the honesty, the integrity, that type of stuff. Getting that in front of the public. Memorial thing that you're talking about, I started that simply for that. Any lodge can do it. Anybody can do it. We just went into the cemetery and found out all the Masonic gravestones and formed a memorial service around it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, that's as simple as it was. And one year we did it, and we did the Blue Lodge burial service. Another year we did the Commandery burial service. And it's just a way to get what we do in front of the public in a very caring and community-based way. We've done weddings. This past Saturday is at my own lodge's installation of officers. I was the chaplain for the service, but a bunch of us in our Class A's also did the flag ceremony. And so in front of all the public, we had an open installation. We came marching in our uniforms with the flag and did the salutes and the sword things. And, and everybody's going, wow, that's really pretty cool. The incoming Worshipful Master, who is not a member of York Rite bodies yet, okay, now he is interested in the York Rite bodies, particularly in the commandery aspect of it. And it turns out he's Filipino, that he was a colonel in the Filipino special SWAT unit. Okay, so one of the things he misses is that whole marching military aspect. So you don't know what you're going to do or touch or who you're going to do it to. I hope that answers your question.
Right Worshipful Kurt Morauer, Senior, thank you so much for coming on this episode of the Craftsman Online Podcast.
Worshipful Brother Michael. Now you're a new Worshipful Master, right?
Freshly minted, somewhat, yes.
That's what I thought. Well, congratulations first off. Condolences second off. But I just absolutely love what you're doing with your podcast. It's I have like 5 different groups I belong to, Masonically based, and I put it, if you're interested in this, here's the place to go. I know that last week you went out to probably 4,000 Masons.
Well, if you've been listening and you enjoyed this episode, make sure you can follow us on Spotify, or you can open up your podcast player now on your iPhone and hit the subscribe button to find us on Apple Podcasts. The Craftsman Online Podcast, we have new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let truth and harmony prevail.